Hey there, I have a rally going for everyone so far. We awake? Awesome. Well, today it's my pleasure to introduce you to my friend Aaron Craig Mitchell. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about atomic storytelling, how the stories we tell have the power to shift the future. And Aaron is someone who's done exactly that. Aaron and I met shortly after he was featured in Wired magazine in a cover story about the story he's about to share with you today. He's a storyteller who will inspire you, as he has me, to think and act differently. And every time we speak, I learn something new from you, Aaron, so thank you. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Craig Mitchell.
Thank you, sir. It's June 30th, 2020, about 5 in the morning, and I'm sitting in my makeshift home office waiting for a live CNBC interview to start. My heart is pounding, and I'm taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. And I'm thinking, this is really about to happen. I'm about to appear on national TV to announce that I convinced Netflix to move $100 million into black banks. All of a sudden, I'm live on Squawk Box with Andrew Sorkin and Netflix's CFO, Spence Newman, and we're talking through how it would all work and why we did it and some of the other important details. Andrew says, thank you, the interview is over, and the screen goes blank. With less than 3 months of planning, I just pulled off the biggest bank heist in history, and I did it in plain sight. Not only did I do it in plain sight, but I got away with it. No cops came busting down the door, and I didn't have to escape to a tropical paradise, even though that would be pretty cool. Now, before you go ahead and Google the biggest bank heists in history, don't get your phones out just yet. The third largest was the Dar es Salaam bank heist in 2007, where $282 million was taken and nobody was ever caught. The second largest was the Central Bank of Iraq heist in 2003, where about $920 million was taken on the eve of the Iraq War, and a whole bunch of people got caught up in that, including a bunch of US soldiers. While you might not see Netflix at the top of the list on your Google search, the initiative I led saw more than $2 billion move from black banks to financial institutions serving black communities. That's 2.2 billion with a B. Way more than those other heists. And more importantly, it continues to make a huge impact in the world in more ways than I can count. And as easy as I make it all sound, it almost didn't happen. As comfortably and confidently as I tell this story, it almost broke me. Up until this moment, I was just an HR professional, just a regular old HR guy, not a banker, not a finance whiz, and I'm certainly not a criminal mastermind. Even still, I pulled off the most important and most innovative feat of my entire career, and I'm here to tell you how I did it. But before I tell you my story, I need to ask you a few questions, and I will accept grunts, mm-hms, and amens as affirmation, all right? Have you ever thought you were meant to make a positive difference in the world, but you fear you missed your moment? Have you been frustrated by feeling like you don't have the right relationships and opportunities just seem to pass you by? Have you ever struggled to be vulnerable about the personal tragedies you've endured, even when they feed your imposter syndrome? Do you fear that you might not recognize your one shot, and that even if you do, you might not be able to seize the moment? Like many of you, my answer to these questions was yes. And so today I'm going to tell you how and why I pulled off the biggest bank heist in history. And I'm going to tell you how to go from where you are today to where you need to be to make that happen. And I'm not sure if anybody here is really interested in pulling off a bank heist. It might be something else that you're interested in. But if you're here today, you want to do something important. You want to solve a big problem. You want to make connections that matter, and I presume you want to win. So, if all that's true, let's begin. Now, I ask that question again. Have you ever thought you were meant to make a positive difference, but you fear that you missed your moment? So I grew up in a working class family in New Haven, Connecticut. New Haven is the home of Yale University, for those that don't know. My mom decorated cakes. My dad was a mechanic and fixed cars and mechanical equipment. I went to public school and I graduated with a 3.2 GPA, so not remarkable. Growing up in the hometown of Yale University in a working class family made places like Yale seem completely out of touch. And so while I didn't think I could ever go to a place like Yale, I did always dream of making it big. And for me, that meant doing something that had a positive impact on the world and not being broke, especially from a working class family. Doing only one of those things wasn't good enough. And so after high school, I went to Temple University and chose to major in human resources because I enjoyed connecting people and sort of challenging different ideas. And HR seemed like the best way to do that and get paid while doing it as well. I graduated from Temple University, started working in HR. After working for a few years, I let a friend convince me that I could compete at places like Yale University, so I instead decided to apply to Harvard Business School. HBS has this mission to educate leaders who make a difference in the world, and I wanted to use it as a stepping stone to a much bigger job than I was doing. I scored a 560 on my GMAT, and anybody who knows anything about Harvard admissions, the average admission is 700 to 770, so I was well below that average. And despite the low score, I decided to shoot my shot, and they let me in. Don't get the wrong idea. This didn't really do much to impact my imposter syndrome. I still felt like I might be admissions mistake. And so during my second year, I was given what I thought was an opportunity to prove myself, but I let it pass me by. I'd been elected the co-president of what the school called the African American Student Union, or what we affectionately called ASU. Every other year, ASU, along with a number of bunch of other clubs in the area, would host a private party in commemoration of the Harvard-Yale game. This private party was attended by alums and students of the respective schools, and a bunch of people from ASU also attended that party. Unfortunately, the party was shut down after only maybe an hour or so because of gang activity. There was no gang activity. It was just a bunch of black folks from Harvard and Yale who were getting together to have a good time. So I want you to imagine like cardigans and polos and boat shoes. I'm thinking maybe the club organizers thought lavender was a gang color. Probably not. In response, the leaders from Harvard and Yale decided that they were going to get together and right this wrong and take legal action. So this seemed like something that Harvard prepared us for, big leadership opportunity. But there was a voice in my head that said, what did these bougie black folks expect? Did they think that going to a fancy place like Harvard or Yale was going to exempt them from America's racism? That's what went through my head. And you know how people get together and they talk in hypotheticals about what they would do during the civil rights era? They would stand up, they would be heroic. I was one of those people, but in my moment, I failed. I always thought I would stand up in the face of racism and bigotry, but I didn't participate. I let fear stop me in my tracks. And eventually, the network filed a lawsuit, and they won. And they proved that the club was discriminatory. And I thought, I must really be an admissions mistake, because I chose my own personal comfort over courage. And I know I'm not the only one here that's ever sort of not stepped up when you thought it was the right thing to do. I felt like I missed my moment to make a positive difference. So after graduating from HBS, I decided to take a job with Citibank. I figured if I wasn't going to step up, I might as well get paid. And so I joined Citi. I spent my time working in HR, and I that allowed me to connect with people and meet some people that were amazing and travel the world. And one of those amazing people that I met was a guy by the name of Ray McGuire. Ray McGuire is a Wall Street legend and one of the very few African Americans to ascend to the top of Wall Street. He has 3 degrees from Harvard and was the global head of investment banking at the time that I joined. Easily the smartest person in just about every room he enters. And so we met for the first time when I was still at HBS, and he told me to not let graduating from HBS be my greatest accomplishment. And that stuck with me because he was trying to remind me that my job was to make a difference and not just get a job and get rich and all the other flashy things that Harvard business alums do. So after building a strong internal and external reputation for getting things done and being a global, innovative HR leader, I was recruited away from Citi to join an insurance company in Massachusetts. Let's call them Mass Insure. So I'm at Mass Insure, and what was supposed to be this huge promotion for me, right? Turns out to be this big old bait and switch. I was supposed to report to the chief HR officer. I was supposed to have all this responsibility to build a leadership institute with a $7 million budget. I was gonna help shift the culture and move leadership out of Western Mass to Boston, and I was gonna be on the succession plan for the chief HR officer role. Instead, the person who hired me takes a job internally. His replacement decides to layer me, so now I no longer report to the chief HR officer. They take the budget away. They take my responsibilities for the Leadership Institute away. They tell me that I'm gonna be working in Western Mass instead of Boston, and I'm no longer on the succession plan. And this stripping away from my responsibilities, as crazy as it sounds, was consistent with the experience of leaders of color at this company. After flying high at Citi for 5 years and living abroad, I didn't expect this, and it took a toll on me mentally and physically. And only after 10 months, I was ready to break. I called my wife to work one day, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And she's like, you know what? I'm tired of watching them humiliate you. Just go ahead and quit. And I'm like, we just had a second child. My wife's not working. But for her to place that level of confidence in me, I'm like, all right, I'm done. So I gave my notice that day. My boss accepted it as long as we'd keep it quiet until we could work out the transition plan. Now, despite the fact that she had told me for months leading up to this point that she was losing faith in my ability to be strategic, she invites me to a talent strategy planning meeting because she values my contribution. Real weird stuff. Let's call it gaslighting, right? So I joined the dinner, and something wild happens, and I'm gonna explain it to you. So I'm sitting at the dinner table after the offsite, and I'm speaking to a colleague directly across from me, right? Actually, you know what? You all are gonna participate in this because I want you to experience what I experienced. I want you to place your left elbow on your left knee, like so, and then go ahead and put your head, yep, get nice and comfortable, right? Now take your right hand, got your right hand? I want you to go ahead and push your elbow. It's a little jarring, isn't it? Right? So this is what happens to me. I'm sitting at the dinner table, elbows on the table, I'm talking to my colleague, and a hand from across the table pushes my elbow off the table. And the person who does it is my HR person. The person I'm supposed to go to if somebody harasses me. That's not cool, is it? Even though I asked y'all to push your elbows off the table, I'm pretty sure at least one of y'all was like, I might slap him after this. Because it's a violation of personal space. And I'm stunned, right? Like, I can't believe this thing just happened. And the first thing that comes to mind is Emmett Till, Emmett Till, Emmett Till. I don't know why, but I had this feeling that if I had reacted with the anger and the hostility that was appropriate for the situation, that I would lose. And so, right next to me, a colleague says, hey, what was that for? And the HR person says, well, he was blocking you out of the conversation, and I was just trying to open up the table. And then she looks me dead in the eye, and she says, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration? And I look at her, and I'm like, no, Not at all. I just stuff it all down, right? Stuff all that anger deep down inside and swallow it. And I proceed to speaking to my colleague across the table as nothing happened. And there I was again, accepting the unacceptable. If this was my moment, I missed another one, right? When I shared this with my friends, I heard so many versions of what somebody should do, and none of it sounded like what I did. It was, I would have told that, you know what time it was. Couldn't have been me. I would have lost my job that day. Let that, I'm sure you can think of all the things that would have been said, right? This HR person's actions were only the tip of the spear of how black people and leaders of color were treated at this company. Yet instead of speaking up and saying something, I left. I didn't say anything. I didn't speak up. I didn't stand up. I just left because I started to wonder if I would ever have the courage, or if I would always just, in these situations, back away. I wasn't at the club when my friends were harassed by these club owners, but I was at the table when my personal space was violated, and yet nothing. Think back to those times you feel like you failed yourself. I want you to hold on to that energy, because even though you think you might have missed your moment, it might be that it wasn't your moment. Now, have you ever been frustrated by feeling like you don't have the right relationships and opportunities seem to pass you by? How many people here work in HR, by the way? Oh, wow. 2. I'm always surprised to see HR people at innovation conferences, because it's not usually the department that's sought after to innovate, and many people don't have good experiences with HR, like including my own, right? I selected HR as a major in college, and I've worked it in my entire career, but it was never my superpower. And it took me a while to figure this out, but connecting people and ideas, that's my superpower. And so while navigating the nonsense with Mass Insure, I joined an advisory board for a recruitment technology company. And one of the other advisors on that advisory board was from Netflix. Let's call her Michelle. I was trying to impress Michelle, not because I wanted a job at Netflix, but because she was smart, Netflix was cool, and I was yearning like some attention from smart, cool people because of the experience I was having at Mass Insure. But she didn't bite. Like, it was like I was shooting these shots and just like nothing. And then after 8 months of just trying to get her attention, and I wasn't doing anything crazy, just being myself, I went from sort of resigning, and then she reaches out and she's like, hey, I got this opportunity on my team you should take a look at. She told me that she'd been observing me, that she liked the way I think, she liked my values, and had it not been for the advisory board, there's no way that based on my resume she would be talking to me. So she advocates for me, she opens up this opportunity, and then she makes me this offer I can't refuse. And so now I'm at Netflix. Amazing. And Netflix was great because even though I was an HR person, it was the first place I got to be the kind of person that can connect people and ideas and be in HR. And my curiosity didn't ever seem like it was a distraction, but it felt like it was additive. And so from 2018 to 2019, I helped to hire people from across different departments and contribute to the massive growth and prosperity that Netflix was having. At the end of 2019, I come up with this idea to increase diversity in the executive ranks. I recognized that diversity recruitment was missing the point. Our leaders lacked relationships with the type of people they wanted to hire because they lacked diversity in their networks. Most executives hire from their networks first, so I knew I had to do something different. I hired a firm called Yardstick Management and its founder, Ebby Parsons, to invite leaders from his diverse network to a dinner, and then I would bring a Netflix executive and I would act as the facilitator. Instead of trying to interview more people from underrepresented backgrounds, I thought that this would be the hack, and we would use dinners to discuss how to change the complexion and composition of the C-suite, and then we'd use that to deepen the relationships of our executives. And although it had some initial resistance, by the beginning of 2020, I've been given the green light to do as many of these dinners as possible. The executives started to feel like they were making connections that mattered, and they were still starting to feel like they could build these diverse teams. I also started to feel like maybe I'm onto my thing. Maybe changing the representation of the C-suite was my contribution to society, and HR was my thing after all. Think about those times when you felt like you were on the cusp of something big, because that's what this felt like for me. Take note of what you were doing. Were you by yourself, or were you working with other people that made you better? Because for me, it's always been in the company of other people that I felt like I'm at my best. As I said, I was given the green light to go all out on these dinners at the beginning of 2020. Got another question for you. Have you ever struggled to be vulnerable about the personal tragedies you've endured because they feed your imposter syndrome? I don't know if you know, or I don't know about y'all, but COVID was one of those things where I haven't met a single person, any part of the world, who hasn't had some negative experience. And my 2020 was off to a rough start even before COVID happened. In early January, I had a cousin who was murdered by police. I'll spare you the details. There were many of these high-profile cases where black men and black women were being killed, and countless others where the force seemed excessive or disproportionate to the crime. And my cousin's was in this latter category and joined the multitude of people who did not receive the fanfare or the notoriety. Not only that, but he was the fifth of my cousins who was murdered since 2009. And so this personal tragedy was a recurring theme in my family. And before I could even process this all, we're all scrambling to get toilet paper. You remember that? And to make matters worse, my home life is in tatters. My wife is no longer working. The kids are home from school. It's madness. It's chaos. And my team is anxious because people were losing their jobs and they're wondering if they're next. Nothing felt like it was working, except I was on the cusp with these dinners. So I tried to focus all my time and energy to figure out, like, how do we get these dinner things going, right? I still felt like we could make it happen. And so I called up Ebby. We're brainstorming ideas. And finally, he suggests, let's do it by Zoom so we can gather people from across the country while offering some form of connection that people are going to need. And so on April 16th, we host our first virtual dinner. And we had food delivered so everybody can enjoy and eat together. It was during this dinner that a leader from one of a handful of black banks says, you know what, as much as I want to engage in this discussion on how to change the complexion and composition of the C-suite, I'm a little distracted. I'm trying to figure out how to get black and brown businesses PPP funding because today is the last day and the major money market banks have failed them. And I remember thinking, well, how are we going to talk about making the C-suite more changing the complexion and composition of the C-suite if we can't even get people out of their neighborhoods? And so as the discussion shifted and we start to understand the issues and the moment in history, Ebby says, yo, how do we get companies to move their cash into black banks? And I'm like, that's a good idea. So it seemed pretty clear and simple, so I volunteered to be the inside man at Netflix to figure it out. So first things first, I meet with Spence, and after he admits he didn't even know black banks existed, he's like, keep looking into it, do some research, let me know what you find out. A friend of mine recommends The Color of Money by a woman named Mehrsa Baradaran to better understand how I might approach this in the historical context. After reading as much as I could and doing as much independent research as I could, I connect with Ray McGuire, my old mentor. When I asked him why this hadn't been done before, because he's like, yo, this is brilliant, you should go ahead and do this. I'm like, well, why hasn't anybody done it? He's like, well, nobody's asked. And I'm like, well, that seems pretty simple. He then connects me with another guy by the name of Harold Butler, who'd done a lot of work with the black banks and with the Treasury and really understood the space. Next, a mentor at Netflix connects me with Bill Bynum, who's a community banking luminary and the CEO of Hope Credit Union. Bill provides some further validation that it's a good idea, but also some context about the challenges, like the balance sheet challenges that many of these banks face because they can't take too much in deposits, or the ratings from Moody's and Standard & Poor's that put them at the bottom of a corporate treasurer's list, or just plain old racist policy that's been normalized over a century that makes these banks hard to consider as a corporate partner. So after speaking with Ray, Harold, Bill, I even mustered the courage to reach out to Mirza Baradaran. And much to my surprise, she actually responds. She loves the idea, but she's pessimistic because she's like, look, $100 million, that's not a lot of money. This racial wealth gap is huge, and anything short of reparations is a half measure. But she did tell me that if I were to use Netflix's popularity to encourage others to do something, that would make a difference. She said something like, look, $100 million is insignificant given the size, the persistence, and the systemic nature of the racial wealth gap. But if a bunch of companies do this, that'll matter. I then connect with a senior black Netflix executive by the name of Dean Garfield, and he's like, look, good idea, put it down on paper so that I can pitch it to the leadership team. And I'm like, bet. But I wasn't even sure I should write this thing. In the back of my mind, I'm like, you know what? Will they care? When I first raised it to Spence for context, he put me in touch with the corporate treasurer or the corporate controller. Corporate controller's like, it's a good idea, but maybe in a couple years when we have a stronger cash position. So I didn't want to be a nuisance, and I didn't think there was a sense of urgency for this thing. I started thinking back to all those other missed opportunities, the Harvard-Yale game, the strategy dinner at Madison Shure, and I started thinking, like, maybe this is just who I am. But while I was writing the proposal, my Netflix algorithm recommends The Black Godfather. And if you don't know, The Black Godfather is about Clarence Avant, who was a recording industry executive and all-around power broker who did a whole bunch of really good stuff behind the scenes. And in fact, he did it without ever grabbing the spotlight and the attention, so a lot of people hadn't heard of him. And it was amazing to see this black man move the way he did, because not only did he make a positive difference, but he walked into rooms like he deserved to be there, and rooms that weren't ready for him. And so after watching this thing, I thought to myself, well, I've got to do this, because what I'm proposing feels so insignificant to all that he's done. What I have to lose? You know, every now and then the Netflix algorithm gets it right. And so on May 22nd, which is a Friday, I send the proposal to Dean. And then May 25th rolls around, and it's a day that sends a shockwave throughout the world. It's the day that George Floyd is murdered. And in the hearts and minds of people everywhere, there was something that was a little different. It was the first time that it felt like the American consciousness agreed that this was unacceptable. And it was hard to go about business as usual. And even though his wasn't the first murder that happened during the pandemic alone, it was the first moment where I realized I hadn't really processed this thing that had happened with my cousin earlier in the year. I was more focused on getting things done, and I had sort of gone numb. So the next day, at a staff meeting with my boss and my peers, I decided to add George Floyd to the agenda, and my boss moves it up to the top of the agenda, much to my surprise. And so, as one of only 2 black leaders on the recruitment team, I was a little surprised that this happens, but I'm overcome, right? And so I share just how much this impacted me and the feelings about my cousin's death and this narrative about my family and all these injustices that I felt like I had experienced. And I just couldn't hold back anymore. This whole thing wasn't okay, and I wasn't okay. My peers and my boss were nice and warm, and they embraced me in ways that I didn't expect. And they shared my intolerance for this injustice. And so my boss mentions, oh, by the way, Reed Hastings had a meeting with his leaders the day before and was talking about how unacceptable this all is. He said he wanted to take action and was tired of these empty statements and promises that companies were making. He said he wanted something tangible. So let me ask you, at this moment, would you have contacted Dean and sent him the proposal? Show of hands. Well, I didn't. I know, right? It's starting to become a theme. Do you fear you might not recognize your one shot, or that you don't have what it takes to seize the moment? After that staff meeting, I shared the proposal with my boss, and just to get her feedback on what I was thinking about doing. And she told me, look, Aaron, I think it's amazing, but don't be disappointed if we don't do anything. And I'm like, look, I won't be disappointed, I'll be devastated. For me, this was a Hail Mary for humanity, and this just had to work. And so the next day, I decided to email Reed Hastings directly. I told him I devised a way to do something to address injustice that wasn't a donation, but was a part of the way we do business. Reed feels strongly that companies should not engage in philanthropy, that that's a personal endeavor, and that companies should instead focus on profits. Capitalism, right? And so within less than an hour of emailing Reed, he responds back, "It's so capitalistic, it warms my heart." Favorite 7 words ever. And all I needed to know that I had his full support. And so while I'd love to say it was smooth sailing from there and the seas parted and everything happened, it was anything but. From the moment Reed gave his blessing, I was on calls with as many advisors as I could get in touch with to try to make things happen as quickly as possible. I asked Ray to speak to our corporate treasurer to get her to understand the role that major money market banks could play. Shannon Alwyn, our corporate treasurer, was a very quick convert, and she became my partner in crime in this thing and was able to understand it financially in ways that I couldn't. I then asked Mirza to do the same with Shannon and Spence to help them understand black banks and the history. I even asked Reed to speak with Bill Bynum, who he had attended the Henry Crown Fellowship with decades before, and they had remained friends. And all of this was happening, and so by Thursday, June 11th, much to my surprise, this thing was dead in the water. The banks couldn't receive the deposits that I had proposed, and what they proposed was outside of Netflix's comfort zone. The next day, I have a call with George Ashton, a guy from the organization Local Initiatives Support Corporation, LISC. A friend of mine, Ayanna Parsons, had connected us a few weeks back, said, hey, you need to talk to this guy, really good dude. I didn't know what we were gonna talk about, but I'm like, Ayanna's good people, so let's do it. After we get on the call, I'm talking to him about the proposal. He tells me what they do, and I'm like, can you put together an investment product that would solve the gap that these black banks have, and we could put the money with you instead of the black banks? And they're like, we've never done anything quite like this, but we'll think about it. I'm like, can you have it done by the weekend? And he's like, okay, sure, y'all are serious. So they put something together, and this call changes everything. They come back the next weekend, and he's like, actually, we can make something like this work. I get him on the call with Shannon. They work out the numbers. It's an actual viable investment product that the company can sign off on, and it could scale. It could be bigger than just Netflix. Spence then gets involved in the conversation again. He says, you know what, instead of 100 million, let's announce it as 2% of cash, because at 2%, that's something that every company can replicate, as opposed to 100 million, which might be an issue for some companies. I then connect with Bill Bynum, and the commitment turns from a no to 10 million in Hope Credit Union, 25 million in LISC, and it changes the way that we go about doing things. In fact, we decide, you know what, instead of just doing this, we're also gonna create a toolkit so that other companies can adopt it. Shannon and I personally got on the calls with over 100 companies to make sure that they understood the toolkit and they could adopt this so they could skip all the steps we took and just go straight to the announcement. We had to keep reminding organizations that 2% of cash should be a non-issue. And it worked. We pulled it off. $2.2 billion by the end of 2022, by the end of 2020. And I couldn't have done it by myself. And so because of Ray McGuire, Harold Butler, Bill Bynum, Spence Newman, George Ashton, Shannon Alwyn, Ebby Parsons, Ayanna Parsons, Mehrsa Baradaran, Dean Garfield, and of course, George Floyd, this thing happens. If it weren't for George Floyd's death, I really don't believe that this initiative would have happened. His murder created an opening that allowed a half-baked idea to come together and change the world. Unlike so many of the promises that companies make, what happened here has been sustained. To give you an example, just using the $25 million that Netflix put into Lisk, that turned into a $250 million fund called the Black Economic Development Fund. And they invited over a dozen companies to join. 100% of the fund was invested in organizations serving black communities. 8,541 housing units were created or preserved. Over 1.1 million square feet of mixed use and commercial space was financed. Capital was invested in 26 cities across 17 states. By investing in black developers, it created $2.3 billion in leverage thanks to the Monday multiplier effect. And more than 11% of the investments are black women-led transactions, and that's compared to 0.34% in VC money that goes to black women. Not only did all this happen, but because of the success, Lisk was able to expand this for another 3 years, and so all these companies are still invested in these communities, and it continues to do good. And so, as I said, not only did I not make this happen and I'm not a mastermind, I could not have done it if it weren't for the timing and the people. And this experience convinced me that you can't miss what's meant for you. I allowed my values to move me into the spaces I needed to be. I cultivated relationships with the kind of people that I wanted to know that just ended up being the right people. I leveraged my unique superpower. I shared my truth. The moment presented itself, and because of all those things, I was ready for the moment. I know this because I've since tried to replicate it. You know, when you do something like this that appears on Wired magazine, you start to feel yourself a little bit. And so I took this HR job for Netflix animation, and I tried to enact big, bold cultural changes for the animation industry. During that process, I lost 26 pounds from where I am now, so just imagine that. Based on stress, burnt myself out, and I was cut loose. I couldn't create the moment that wasn't there. I tried to do it with NFTs after I left Netflix. Y'all remember NFTs? I spent a lot of money and time trying to convince myself and other people that this was the next moment. The moment never arrived, and the opportunity to address global injustices is still available. I've had to reflect on this Heist experience to really understand that I didn't control it. I didn't make it happen. The door that opened when George Floyd was murdered was the moment, and I was able to move in. And so I want to leave you with a little bit of advice. First, cultivate your superpower. The more you hone it and make people aware of it, the better equipped you'll be when it's your time. My superpower is connecting people to solve intractable problems. It's important that you know what yours is and you invest in that. Second, create real friendships and be a real friend. Don't network. Don't do it transactionally, but build a network. I had long-standing relationships with people that I value that I could tap in to make this initiative happen, which was a whole lot easier than trying to sell something to people. Are you making friends? Third, use your truth. Learn to be vulnerable and learn to be authentic. Let it be the fuel that allows you to do the impossible. This heist was an innovative way for me to address systemic racism, which is an injustice that I just couldn't take anymore, that impacted my life in way too many ways. And it was important for me to understand this, and it's important for you to understand your truth. And lastly, be patient. I was ready for the moment, but I didn't create the moment. I can't miss what's meant for me, and y'all can't miss what's meant for you. So I want to leave you with a little bit of poetry. Not my own, because I'm not much of a poet, but it's a poem called Desiderata, written by Max Ehrmann in 1927. I came across it as I was preparing this keynote, and it felt like the most appropriate way to close. Go placidly amid the noise and the haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even in the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexatious to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain or bitter, for always there will be greater or lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself, especially do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be patient with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham, judgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful, strive to be happy. My name is Aaron Craig Mitchell, and I'm just an HR professional, like y'all too. But I pulled off the biggest bank heist in history so far. When you live your life with intention and build a community of people aligned with your values, the moment will meet you, and you'll be ready for it. Thank you.